It was 11:40 at night, January, and the storm had been running hard off the Pacific for 6 hours. I had just come in from checking the light. Rain on the windows, the beam turning in the dark above me, the way it had turned every night for 8 years. I knew every sound that headland made in a storm, the way the spruce bent and recovered, the way the water hit the cliff face 80 feet below, the particular low note the keeper's house made when the wind came from the northwest. I knew all of it. What I heard next, I did not know. From the edge of the forest, on the north side of the headland, a call. Long, low, carrying in the way that certain sounds carry through storm wind, not because they are loud, but because they are at the right frequency to cut through the noise. I went to the window, rain on the glass, the beam sweeping, nothing visible in the dark. And then, from farther away, from somewhere south along the coast, an answer. I stood at that window for a long time. The storm continued. The sounds did not come again. I went to my log, and I wrote down what I had heard, because I am a keeper, and keepers log what they observe, and I didn't yet know that I would still be logging versions of that same entry 23 years later. My name is Harold Finch. I am 78 years old. I live in Newport now, in a small house 3 blocks from the water, close enough to hear the ocean at night. I was a lighthouse keeper for 31 years, on a headland on the central Oregon coast, about 12 miles south of Newport. The Coast Guard automated the light in 1994, and I stayed on as a volunteer caretaker for 22 years after that, because I was not finished, and the headland wasn't finished with me. 22 of those years, I was alone on that headland. I am going to tell you what I was not alone with. The lighthouse sits on a headland that juts out into the Pacific, about 80 feet above the water at high tide. On the landward side, the headland drops back into a coastal forest. Sitka spruce mostly, with some shore pine and red alder near the creek. Dense the way Oregon coastal forest is dense, the spruce growing so close together and the understory so thick with salal and sword fern that 30 feet in you cannot see the headland anymore. On foggy mornings, and there were many, the tree line simply dissolved into white. It is old forest, old growth in patches, second growth in others. And it has that quality that old coastal forest has, a quality of enclosure, of being inside something that has been here much longer than you. I walked that forest every day for 31 years. I knew every trail, every drainage, every place where the elk bedded, and every place where the creek pooled deep enough for cutthroat in spring. I knew what was in that forest, until I didn't. The first indication came in the winter of 1985. That January night, I had been on the headland for 8 years. The entry I wrote afterward was brief. I wrote, 11:40 p.m., heard unidentified vocalizations, 2 occurrences, north and south of headland, during storm conditions. Not identifiable as any known marine mammal or seabird. Low frequency, long duration. Will note if recurs, it recurred. Not often, but regularly. Over the next 23 years, I logged 47 instances. I am a methodical man. I had eliminated, by the 5th year, every reasonable explanation. Elk, sea lions, storm effects on the forest structure, equipment sounds from the highway. None of them fit. I kept logging. That is what keepers do. I want to tell you about one night in the winter of 1988, because I think it illustrates something about those 6 years between the first sound and the first sighting. It was February. No storm that night, which was unusual. The ocean was running heavy swells from a weather system farther out, and the sound of the water against the headland was low and rhythmic, the kind of sound that makes it difficult to isolate anything else. I had been in the watchroom, doing the hourly log, when I noticed that the forest was quiet in a way it was not usually quiet. Not silence exactly. The ocean was there. The wind in the spruce was there, but the birds had stopped. The small nighttime sounds that I had learned, over 10 years, to hear without consciously hearing them, were absent. I sat with that for a few minutes, and then, from somewhere in the upper spruce, maybe 100 yards north of the lighthouse, a single sound, not the paired call I had heard in the storm 3 years earlier. A single, long, descending vocalization. The kind of sound that seems to carry more information than a sound should be able to carry, and that leaves you with the sensation of having been addressed, even if you cannot say how. It didn't repeat. I went to my secondary notebook, the one that was not the official log, and I wrote, 9:22 p.m. single vocalization, north, upper spruce, clear conditions, no storm. Duration approximately 4 seconds, descending tone. Reminiscent of January 1985, incident but single occurrence, no answer from south. Birds in the adjacent alder stand were silent before and for approximately 10 minutes after. I noted the birds, because birds know things, and their silence was data, and I was collecting data. I closed the notebook. The light turned above me. The ocean ran against the cliff. I went back to the watchroom, and I thought, for the first time, not what is making that sound, but where is it going afterward? I saw something in the spring of 1991. I had gone down the trail to the creek to check on a drainage that had been giving me trouble after a wet winter. It was early morning. The fog had not lifted yet. The kind of coastal fog that sits in the spruce canopy and drips, so that the forest sounds like light rain even when the sky is clearing. The light was flat and gray, the way it is flat and gray before the sun gets above the ridge. I was crouching at the edge of the creek when I became aware that something was watching me from the far bank. Not a feeling, an awareness, a specific, located awareness, in the way that you are aware of a person standing near you in a dark room. I looked up slowly. Across the creek, in the shadow of the spruce, something was standing very still. It was large, dark, on 2 feet, fully upright, in the way that nothing that large stands fully upright in a coastal forest. We looked at each other across the creek. The creek was not wide, 8 feet, maybe 10. I could see it clearly. It could see me clearly. Neither of us moved. I'm going to tell you what I thought in that moment, because I think it matters. I thought, so that is what has been making those sounds. Not, what is that? Not, am I in danger? Not, this is impossible. So that is what has been making those sounds. 6 years of logging 47 instances had prepared me. In some way, I had not consciously understood, for the moment when I would see the thing that was making them. It stood for about 3 minutes, and then it moved back into the spruce, in the way that things move when they have finished doing what they came to do. I crouched at the creek for a while longer, and then I checked the drainage, and then I went back to the lighthouse, and I logged it. I wrote, 6:15 a.m., Observed unidentified bipedal subject. North Creek drainage. Opposite bank. Distance approximately 8 to 10 feet. Duration approximately 3 minutes. Dark coloration. Height estimated 7 to 8 feet. Subject appeared to observe me. Did not approach. Withdrew into spruce stand. No vocalization. No aggressive behavior. Clear morning light. Positive identification of bipedal stance and general morphology. And then I made breakfast, because I was a keeper, and keepers make breakfast. Over the following years, I had 4 more clear sightings. The one I think about most was in the autumn of 1994. It was late October. The light had just been automated, and I had been adjusting to the strangeness of that. The machinery running without me. The keeper's purpose reduced to maintenance and explanation. I had been walking the upper trail that morning, the one that runs along the ridge before dropping back into the spruce, and I had stopped to watch a pair of gray jays working the edge of the tree line below me. I noticed it because of the jays. They stopped. Both of them, at the same moment, and oriented toward a section of the spruce about 40 yards downslope. I looked where they were looking, at the edge of the trees, where the ridge trail bends, and the spruce stand opens briefly before closing again. It was standing, partially visible, the near side of its body in the open, the far side still in the trees, as if it had paused mid-crossing, mid-step, and then registered my presence on the ridge above. We were perhaps 60 feet apart. What I noted, later, in the secondary log, was the posture in that moment of mutual recognition. No urgency, no startled retreat. It simply stopped, the way a person stops when they realize they have walked into a room they did not expect to find occupied, assessed the situation, and then continued into the trees at the same unhurried pace, without looking back. That pace, that unhurried quality, it did not behave like an animal that considered itself prey. I wrote that down. I wrote, subject did not flee. Subject adjusted. There is a difference. All in the coastal forest. All brief. All with the same quality, of something that had been present for a long time, and was not particularly concerned about being seen, and was not particularly interested in interaction, and was, in a word I keep coming back to, resident. It was resident in that forest, the way I was resident on that headland. We were neighbors. We had been neighbors for years before I understood that. After 1991, I understood it, and I conducted myself accordingly. I did not try to track it. I did not set cameras. I did not tell anyone, because I was the lighthouse keeper, and the lighthouse keeper reports what he observes in his log. And his log is an official document, and I was not going to put something in an official document that I could not support with conventional evidence. What I did was this. I went on walking the forest every day, the same trails, at the same hours. I talked, as I walked, the way I had always talked to myself, because solitary people develop that habit, and it is a good habit, and I was not going to change it. I narrated what I was doing. I said the names of things. I talked about the light, which is what lighthouse keepers talk about, because the light is the job, and the job is what you have when you have a solitary life. And I kept logging, not the ordinary things. Those I logged officially. The other things, the sounds, and the presence, and the occasional disturbance in the forest that suggested something large moving through it with deliberate care. Those I logged in a separate notebook. I have that notebook. It covers 23 years. It is, I think, the most complete record of this kind that anyone has kept, without knowing they were keeping it. I kept it because I am a keeper. Because logging what you observe is what keepers do. Because the thing you are observing does not have to be what you expected to observe in order to deserve to be observed carefully. The last entry in that notebook is from October of 2015, 6 months before I left the headland. It says 4:45 a.m. Vocalization, northwest, in the spruce above the headland trail. Single, long, direction of travel unclear. Last logged instance was 14 months ago. I have been thinking about leaving. I wonder if it knows. I wonder if the pattern of my walking has changed in ways I have not consciously registered. And if something that's been watching a person walk the same trails for 30 years can read a change in that pattern and understand what the change means. I do not know the answer to that. I left in the spring. I did not say goodbye. I did not know how. I still do not know how. But I think about the October morning in 1991, crouching at the creek, looking across 8 feet of water at something that had been making sounds in the storm for 6 years, and thinking, so that is what has been making those sounds. And I think about 30 years of walking the same forest with something resident in it, patient and dark and old in the way that coastal things are old, worn smooth by weather and time and the long repetition of the ocean. And I think, that is a life. That is a whole life. Not the lighthouse, not the log, not the light, though those too, but also 30 years of walking a coastal forest and being known in it by something that knew it better than I did, and for longer, and that made room for me anyway. That made room for a keeper on a headland, and let him log his 47 instances, and never once came through the fence. I am grateful, in the plain way, in the enough way. I am 78 years old. I can hear the ocean from my house, and sometimes, at night, when the wind is coming off the water and the conditions are right, I hear something that is not the ocean. Low, long, carrying. I cannot be certain, but I log it anyway, because I am a keeper, and keepers log what they observe. That is the whole of it. That is everything.